I do believe that America is being punished for being lost. The pandemic is a biblical plague, and there's no two ways about it. Wherever it came from, it's a plague nonetheless. There's wars, rumors of more wars. The economy is bad. You have these people in power. People need to wake up. People need to understand that America is a special place.
Hello, Culminators. Today we're going to talk to Joe McBride, Joseph McBride, a distinguished criminal attorney who got into the criminal law game because of his personal experience with a member of his family being treated to the glories of the American criminal justice system. And Joe is an American hero. There's no other way to put it. First of all, to be clear, I consider anyone who practices criminal law a hero because it scares the hell out of me. The responsibility is just so vast. Joe, though, is not only representing all kinds of criminal defendants, but he's been very active and very vocal about what's going on with respect to January 6th defendants who have been systematically, I'm going to say it, systematically denied every kind of constitutional right from A to Z. Joe, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Doing good, Ron. It's good to be here, and thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So you and I are both from Brooklyn.
Yes.
But
yes, indeed.
You have retained more of the native sound, I must admit.
The native tongue.
Well, I think to some extent, with the two things going on, right? One is that one of my parents is a foreigner, and my wife, my wife's from New England. Her father was from a Spanish-speaking country, and I'm from Brooklyn, and my mother is from a Spanish-speaking country. And I think when you have foreign parents or a foreign parent, your regional accent is decreased because I think they tend to have less of it. I could be wrong about that, but also I think I made a very conscious decision when I was in college to try to get rid of, especially when I started doing radio, and I would hear air checks and hear myself.
Right.
And but I think in your line of work it can't do you any harm.
No. I agree. When I was in law school, I went to Cardozo Law, which is it's yeshiva, and so a lot of accents there, a lot of New York accents for sure.
Right.
And I thought about maybe toning it down. In my mentor, Jonathan Oberman, who's a brilliant professor, doesn't talk to me anymore, probably because my defense of President Trump. But God bless him, I still love him nonetheless. He sat me down and he told me that two really good piece of advice that he gave me. One was with regard to presenting to a jury at a jury trial. Don't go up there and talk like a lawyer. Everybody knows you're a lawyer. Explain it to the jury as you would to grandma and grandpa or Uncle Jack at dinner, and you'll get a lot further. It was great advice. It's worked wonders for me. And of course, the other one was be your true authentic self. That's who you are. People like a good criminal defense / civil rights attorney with a good Brooklyn accent. You go out there and you be you because you're the last of the dying breed. So I said, I'll take it.
Yes. Yep. You are it. It's interesting too, because I was once pulled aside by an older partner at my first law firm, with the old K. Scholler firm. And he told me I was never going to make it. And he was right, by the way. I certainly didn't make it at K. Scholler because I was too, he didn't put it this way, but I was too blue collar.
Yeah.
And he said, and I said to him, I'm thinking, I don't know, I made it through Princeton, I made it through Northwestern. How blue collar could I possibly be? Answer is no. He was right. I never fit into the world of corporate law because I'm not the child of professionals. I'm not even the child of Americans on one side, I think it does give you, but once you recognize who you are, I say you got that great advice from someone who cared about you. This guy
Yes.
cared about me also, but he gave me advice that I couldn't follow.
Look, maybe he was right in part or wrong in part, but I'm glad that you didn't fit into that world. It means that you have a soul and a conscience.
Right.
So,
No, I think at the end of the no, you're 100% right. I mean, I have plenty of friends who succeeded in that world, but I couldn't do it. I
right.
couldn't do it. I'll tell you another story also about being what I said before about being a criminal law. I learned this from Scott Greenfield, I think, CDL, the criminal defense lawyer. Well, so my wife's father, of blessed memory, was a surgeon. And first of all, no Jewish husband can ever live up to his father-in-law. Let's start with that.
It's not happening.
But if he's a heart surgeon,
forget it.
Forget it. And certainly, I mean, I can't even prescribe, antibiotics, much less crack open someone's chest. So really, I'm a bum. But my wife is a retired lawyer, and she didn't practice a lot of law. She mostly writes about law now, but she, in her brief corporate law career, she learned that it wasn't for her. But when we got married, and she would see me coming home, and I would tell her about the work I was doing, and she saw the kind of hours I was keeping. She said, "I guess I have to admit, you corporate lawyers, you litigators, really are the surgeons of the legal profession. You're really and coming from her, right, whose father was a surgeon." But I maintain that we may be the surgeons, especially those of us who actually go into court, not these corporate. But the criminal defense lawyers are the brain surgeons.
I appreciate that.
I just don't, the responsibility. And the fact is, not everybody who works in criminal defense is the next, learned hand. But they're often very, very effective all the same.
Right. Right. I grew up, my mother's Puerto Rican, my father's mixed European, mainly Irish, some Polish and German. But I grew up, oldest guy in my family, 3 brothers. We had a bunch of foster kids come through the house. My parents were foster parents, and my brother Anthony's adopted. And you learn a lot of life skills, mediating disputes, putting people in their place, being held responsible for the entire tribe of children underneath you, and all that stuff you deployed in the criminal law practice. It's one of those things where your life skills are very transferable. It doesn't behoove you just to be a walking textbook. You got to know people, bedside manners.
When did you decide you wanted to do criminal defense?
I decided that I wanted to do criminal defense in 2006.
And that's when your brother got involved with his situation?
Yeah, that's when my brother was, he was wrongfully arrested and accused in 2005. In 2006, wrongfully convicted, sentenced to 15 years in prison for something he absolutely did not do. And as I stated before, my mom and dad, good people. I come from a traditional Catholic home, and my mom couldn't have more kids, so we adopted my brother Anthony, and we had dozens of kids come through our home. And the one guy that they were able to adopt, to watch him get dragged away by the system. And when he got dragged away, he was actually, it was surreal, because he had the old black and white striped uniform on.
You're
and he
kidding.
shuffled in with chains on.
Where was this?
This was in Greenville, Tennessee, East Tennessee. Yeah, East Tennessee. My mom and dad relocated down in Northeast Tennessee after my dad retired from Con Edison, right around that time, a year or two before that. And, watching him get drug away like that. And then it was one thing to sit in my brother's room and look up at his sports stuff and the cell phones, and to go, but it's, man, by the time he gets out, the whole world's going to be different. Then when I went back inside and I watched my mom and dad just sitting there praying, and going over scriptures and talking to each other, consoling each other, they were broken. And, I was actually considering It's not my calling for sure, but I was considering a vocation to the Catholic priesthood at the time. Turns out I don't have the gift of celibacy, but that's just not for me.
This is a gift. It's something you work for.
Yeah, whatever it is, I can't do it. So I had just really gotten the answer about a few days before that I actually wasn't called to be a priest, and I was just like, God, what am I supposed to do in my life? And then this happens with my brother, and I just basically I felt God tell me inside that go and sell all that you have and come follow me. I want you to be an outspoken Catholic attorney.
Wow.
We're going to start here with working on your brother's case, and just trust in me. I'll take you by the hand. If you let me lead you, I'll guide you, and together we'll go.
So do you really feel that it was a spiritual message for you?
Oh, 100%. There's no question about it.
That's to me, because I mean, look, everything is a spiritual message, but we most of the time we don't want to listen, and we convince ourselves that we know better than what God has in store for us, which is never the case.
It's never. It's never the case.
Now, where were you in life at that point? Had you 2006? You were not in law school yet, obviously.
No, I hadn't gone to college.
Hadn't gone to college yet. You was how old were you?
I was 25. So I was in the
Hadn't gone to college and you were 25. What were you doing?
So I was in the mixed martial arts world for a long time, fighting and training guys. I was naturally a naturally good fighter, but just not naturally disciplined enough, or it wasn't my calling. And what I mean by that is this: I was a good athlete, I was a good fighter. I was a good had a business on the side. I was always a good business guy. I had a good sense about me. I was a street smart kid from Brooklyn and knew how to get stuff done. But none of those things were ever to the point where it became a vocation for me. But I knew that once the thing happened with my brother, and once I knew that this was my calling, that this was all or nothing. And I'm a very all or nothing guy. So it made sense that I never became a great success in any of those things beforehand, because I just could never find a career that I was all or nothing at. When I figured out I would take my business sense, and I would take my natural fighting abilities and my faith, and I would combine them into becoming an attorney. And look, it was going to cost me everything. I knew I was going to die 1,000 deaths. I knew it, but I also, God put it in my heart that the end would be worth it, and that the means would justify the end. So I sold out, and I went to school. I showed up at John Jay College, and I got in. I tell you, I talked my way in. I smoothed my way in. I'm very good at cajoling people, and I wind up being basically a straight A student when I was there, and I got into a good law school. I applied to like 33, 34 law schools. I got into like 27 of them. And
if only you would have known you were going to get into so many.
Yeah, it was.
You must have spent thousands of dollars on application fees.
I got to tell you the truth. I was flat broke, and I did the poor man's appeal on all of them, and I think I paid for like one.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I was a broke student. I had left a cash money business to go to college and law school, and by the time I was there, it was just really me and God, in the end, because every step of the way required great faith. It was just going deeper and deeper and deeper, and until I finally was able to cross the threshold and get admitted to the bar, and then look at the judge and go, "You guys have no idea who you just let in the door. But I ain't going anywhere."
So what year were you admitted?
I was admitted in 2016. Took me 10 years to become a lawyer.
You're a baby in the profession. I mean, one thing about criminal law, I'm no way means to take away from you, but you can. One thing about that part of the legal profession, you can get into the action and make a name for yourself very fast.
Very fast. I did my internships at the different places. I thought maybe I'd become a DA and work it from the other side. I said, I can't be a part of this. And then I wound up going to the Innocence Project, working on wrongfully convicted cases. I was there in Manhattan for a year and a half. Then I graduated. I went straight into the Legal Aid Society in Manhattan. I started as a public defender there. And I did well. I always carried myself as a private attorney. I always knew it was a matter of time before I left, and I did very well. I just I hit the ground running. I basically won all my cases, and I just at some point after the 2016 election.
All right, hold on a second. People have to understand ahead. When a lawyer says, "I won all my cases," that means the cases you took to a jury.
Of course.
Not the cases that you pled out.
Oh, no. I mean, sorry. I don't want to. That's a good distinction, Ron. I apologize.
You and I understand. And
yeah,
the other three people listening, of two of whom might be lawyers, might understand. But people have to, you would, because that would be a remarkable thing. And I don't doubt that you're capable of it, but.
No, it's a worthwhile distinction, and I apologize.
But that's so that's still an amazing accomplishment. That if you couldn't get the deal, or your client wouldn't make the deal, or whatever, and you took it to trial, you won. You got not guilty verdicts in every one of those trials.
I got not guilties in every one. And in the cases, there was one or two cases where we were going into the case. There was one case, for instance, where a guy was charged with drug possession. He had done a year in jail. They misrepresented something in the grand jury. I was able to get him out. And then I was able to go in and beat the top charges. He went down on the misdemeanor. He had already done the year. The guy had 47 convictions. He went home that day. That's a win. You know what I mean? So it's relative, but I did well, and I was able to take that and bring it out into the real world with me. And I've been doing, I think, pretty good and honorable work ever since.
Sounds like it. Let's talk a little bit about plea deals since it kind of came up.
Sure.
There's a lot of misunderstanding, and a lot of confusion. I mean, one of the things that always amuses me is that there are certain very well-known criminal lawyers, and they charge lien on your house type fees. And of course, they're always pleading out. They never go to trial.
Right.
Explain how it is that nonetheless skill and experience go into that plea deal process, and why these people seem to be worth it to the people who, and I assume that it's true of you as well.
Yeah, of course.
So, of course, it's what's going on.
So it's the assessment of consequences as risk versus reward. If you're facing a 20, 30 years in jail or millions of dollars in fines, let's use the jail example, right? You're facing life in prison. You're facing 20 years, 15 years in jail. You could go to trial and win, but if you lose, you can get banged over the head with a big sentence, especially if you have prior offenses. And if your attorney can cut you a deal that eliminates the exposure of trial and sends you to jail for 2 years as opposed to 22 years, that is a good deal for you to take, and you may want to take that. So anytime I litigate a criminal case, I am saying, look, we're going to trial and we're preparing for trial, and the threat of trial and my skill as a trial attorney looms. But I'm also negotiating my pants off the whole time, trying to get my client the best deal possible under the sun. I have walked into the well and prepared for trial and had a deal offered to me right there that we couldn't refuse, and taken it right there because it makes sense. So you negotiate concurrently to the threat of going to trial up until the very last second, because that's what you owe your client. You owe your client, say, hey, I'm going to work to try to eliminate the possibility of trial for you, even though I think this is our chances. And if we get a deal, an offer we can't refuse, we take it, if that's what you want to do. And if you don't want it, then we go to trial. But you negotiate the entire time. It's something you have to do.
And are prosecutors assessing you, or are they saying, I would take this case to trial, except it's McBride or it's X or it's Y? Or
sure,
that's part of their calculation as well.
Sure. So like you look at the O.J. Simpson defense team, right? You had Shapiro, and you had Johnny Cochran, right? And Johnny Cochran was the trial guy, and Shapiro was the guy that was known for cutting deals, right? So if anybody was going to negotiate a deal, it was going to be Shapiro. But Cochran's the fact that you're going to have to go to trial and deal with Johnny Cochran was this threat, right? So of course that's going to speak volumes, and prosecutors who know you will be able to assess, do a proper threat assessment of who you are at trial. And then prosecutors who don't know you, well, then they find out after or during, and they go, "Oh no," right? So it's always a good moment. It's fun.
Now, I always have the impression that a lot of CDLs are former prosecutors. They've at least spent some time on the other side. But what percentage would you say?
I'd say it's probably 50%.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these guys become really, really vicious anti-prosecution.
Yeah.
I mean, it's they've seen it. I mean, what's your and I want to talk about January 6th in a second. But now that you've been doing this for not very long, still for 6 years, but you've gotten to know prosecutors, and you've got to know criminal defense lawyers who are former prosecutors. Has your view of what they do for a living changed in any way from the way you saw it when you first came out?
I want to say yes. So I traced my legit legal experience back to like probably 2008. I was fortunate where even in college, I got some really good internships. I clerked for a few judges during that time, and I was able to learn so much from them. And then I was at the DA's office for a year, 2009.
Oh, so at least you got to look at.
Yeah, I got a good five years. I mean, I got into a really good program at John Jay where they were able to get. I'm Puerto Rican, so it's a Puerto Rican Latin American Studies program. And if you were first generation college student, which I am, a member of a person of color, historically, whatever community, you can get into these programs. And I qualified for all those things because it's true. So I took full advantage, and I was able to get these internships that would otherwise be held available for the very, very, very privileged. And I was able to see a good scope and see that people become prosecutors, I believe, for good reasons. And I think people become defense attorneys for good reasons as well. And I think, and with regard to the prosecutors, as time goes by, it becomes less about justice. Prosecutors have this immense power in their hands, right? They're lawyers, but they also have the power of the state. So when it comes to law and criminal law, they're held to a higher standard because they're wielding the power of governmental force. And that's something that no one else in criminal law or law at large has. And they in this discretion is one of the attractive things that why they become prosecutors. But then they find out within the first year or so that their supervisors take their discretion away from them. And they're told it's a numbers game, and that's to go out there and they get convictions, and they take the humanity out of it. And I saw that during my time as a public defender because I was with the prosecutors in the well of the court for 8 hours a day, several days a week.
What county were you working in?
In New York County, in Manhattan. And I got some of those guys are my best friends. I became great friends with them. I actually had more in common with them than I had some of the public defenders I worked with because it turns out I'm not a communist. But that's another discussion. So I have great respect for them. And I was able to understand, even a lot of my brother's wrongful conviction, that lots of these people came to this for good reasons. Now, DC is a disgusting, immoral, lost place. There is no moral compass here. There is no sense of humanity on the other side. There is no respect for the Constitution. If the federal government is coming for you, it says, well, we have no check. And if we are vertically integrated from here to the presidency, and most of Congress agrees with us, we're just going to run roughshod over the Constitution and do whatever we want to do. And that's what they're doing to January 6ers in the worst way possible. And it's disturbing. It's disgusting. And I don't use these terms lightly, but when I look at how the Nazi regime came to power, when I look at how the Soviets took control, what's happening now is not much different than all of that.
I'll tell you the truth. You're right, and obviously, I'm apt to be defended by rash comparisons, but the degradation of the rule of law, in particular in Washington D.C., on so many levels, but especially with respect to what's going on in the District of Columbia. And I have to be careful because I'm admitted to that court as well, and I can't quite say what I would necessarily say in private, but it is really, really distressing. You're one of several J6 criminal defense lawyers that I know, and what's amazing to me is how people like you and Marina Medvin and Dan Hull, you just keep keeping on. I mean, okay. Give an example of the kind of things you're seeing in these prosecutions that you would never have seen in New York County or the Southern District, even the Southern District of New York.
Sure.
Where the arrogance is
we're the Southern District.
Way up there.
Right. Yeah, of course. So the first primary example is the controversy behind the application of the Bail Reform Statute and Bail Reform Act. If you're accused of a crime, a federal crime, whether it's some federal kind of trespassing or serious drug trafficking or crimes of violence, you have to be deemed, number one, a flight risk. If you're not a flight risk, you have to be dangerous to the extent where your release would danger the public. It would danger members of the public. And also, in addition to that, there has to be no condition or combination of conditions set forth by pretrial services under which you could not be rendered not a threat. So, for instance, Sam Bankman-Fried, right? This guy, he just defrauded people of $1 gazillion. He's out on bail, right? He's out on bond. How did that happen, right? Because they had to extradite him from a foreign country, but yet he was deemed not a threat. That makes no sense, right? And
not a flight risk. Certainly not a flight risk.
So yeah, well, he objectively he could be a flight risk.
That's what I'm saying. Is that here's a guy who had to be extradited. Yeah, you can take a guy's passport away, but who are we kidding?
Right.
If anyone's a flight risk, it's someone you have to bring someone in from another country.
That's exactly right. Right. Or you got to be dangerous, like Osama bin Laden dangerous, right? El Chapo dangerous. These guys, January 6ers, the vast majority of them have no criminal records of any kind. Most of them have never been arrested before. And they're certainly not flight risk. And the idea that no combination of conditions, that home detention, ankle monitoring bracelets, having to take drug tests and regular check-ins, that somehow the good people in your house as well, somehow these people are so dangerous that they can't be released into the community is just wrong. So what did they do? They took out all the previous precedent leading up to January 5th, and it created new law for January 6th that applies specifically to January 6ers, judging them and judging their sense of dangerousness based on their conduct that day. That is not supposed to happen. That is what has happened. And as a result, we have had men who have been behind bars under egregious, disgusting, horrifying circumstances for 2 years as of today. And some of them, many of them, have not even gone to trial. It's unconscionable. It should have never happened. It's a gross stain on American jurisprudence, and it happened right here in D.C. It's not happening anywhere else.
All right, but we're talking about prosecutors. I mean, on the one hand, judges are the ones applying these new criteria. On the other hand, are you surprised that the prosecutors are asking for it? In other words, would you, if this were, let's say, the Eastern District,
Right.
which is not so different from the Southern District. And in fact, sometimes they feel like they got to prove something, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, a normal federal district or New York State court, would the prosecutors argue for that? Whether or not, in other words, I'm asking is it only the judges or is it also the prosecutors?
No, it's
Or is there a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's both of them. And the way it worked is this, right? So in the beginning, most of these guys either turned themselves in or they got arrested in their home jurisdictions. They went in front of the magistrate in their home jurisdictions. Magistrate said, "We're letting you out." Right? You're objectively not a violent person. I don't like what you did at the Capitol, and you'll sort that out during your trial. But locking you up, this is ridiculous. We're not doing that. What happened is DC immediately filed for a stay and appealed all of those decisions. And they pulled original jurisdiction, pulled it out of the magistrate's hands, back to DC court, had these guys extradited, and everybody who came back to DC, 100% of them in their next hearing were all locked up. And they started doing that. First, it started with a group of 33 people. Then it became like 300 people. Then it became 800 people, and it just kept happening. So if, in other words, if for the first year and a half, if you were indicted and say you got picked up in Houston and a Houston judge let you out, DC would appeal it, drag you back to DC and lock you up.
And is
unprecedented.
And the DC Circuit signed off on this?
Yes.
I mean, is there anything that the DC Circuit doesn't sign off on when it comes to, the district courts there? I mean, I saw after what they did in the Flynn case, I said, okay, this is going back to your earlier point. This is an illegitimate regime. This is not a rule of law regime.
That's right.
So how about Speedy Trial Act?
So this is what happened with speedy trial. You get pulled in and the government goes like this. This is the biggest investigation in the history of the United States. It's got the biggest amount of discovery and corresponding budget. We're trying to pull together people, so on and so forth. In addition to that, you have all the complications due to COVID-19. So in the interest of justice, we need the Speedy Trial Act waived in order to facilitate, to come up with the discovery that the defense attorneys and their clients need in these cases. So we said, okay, listen, if you're going to need time, exorbitant amount of time, these guys could foreseeably be in jail for 6 months, a year, 2 years before trial happens. Let them out. Oh, no, they have to stay in. So not only did they have to stay in, because it was a pandemic-related jail time, they used the pandemic as a pretext to put everybody in solitary confinement because they had to isolate them. So these guys did like a year in the box, which broke them. You can't do that to a pretrial detainee. It's insane. And then finally, we uploaded your discovery onto USAFX. We are rolling out this new system, Relativity. We're rolling out evidence.com. You can't use it unless you get a license. You can't use it unless you get a training. There's a protective order. The public can't see the discovery. By the time they started rolling it out, it was another delay of 6 months for us to just figure out how to use it. And then when they had rolled the majority of it out, they started dumping it all on us and going, oh, we're ready for trial. What's the matter with the defense? They're not ready for trial on Tuesday? Excuse me, it just took you a year to give me this material. We haven't even begun to look at it and you want us to go to trial now? Are you insane? And that fight took another year. And they knew that was going to happen. And now we're 2 years down the road and our first trial is going to happen on Monday.
And these judges have basically admitted, I've heard some of these sentencing statements by the judges. They essentially admitted that they're treating these defendants, these charges are being treated differently because of the political and cultural and historic, whatever you want to call it, nature of the January 6th.
That's right. That's right.
That's really problematic.
It is problematic. And as you know, as you're aware, we have to take a trip back in order to understand the genesis of this problem. We have to go back to September 11th. And after September 11th, the world changed forever. It never returned to the state that it was in. September 11th began the era of if you see something, say something. It was the official spy on your neighbors campaign that began then. So the media coverage and the you see something, say something got to the point where I will be the first person to admit this. If I got on the plane in 2003, and if I saw a gentleman next to me who was dressed in Muslim garb, I would go like this. Oh God, what am I doing here? Is the plane going to go down? That guy probably prays 5 times a day. He doesn't eat pork. He doesn't drink. He's probably got 10 kids, pays his taxes, do all these things. And I made a judgment on that guy about my safety based on you see something, say something. And then a few years later, the question came, look, we have these people in DC, I was going to say DC Guantanamo. We have these people in Guantanamo Bay. They're enemy combatants, but as the United States, do we torture them? And a lot of people were like, they're terrorists. You got to torture them, waterboard them, and get whatever you can get out of them. And other people, mainly on the left, the ACLU, Amnesty International, said, hey, this is America. We don't do that here. I understand you want the information, but we can't become like the other side. Once we become like the other side, there's no turning back. And once that happens to these people, there's a substantial risk that it'll happen to us. Oh, that'll never happen to us. Well, guess who's the next? Guess who's the next? Who's the newest version of Al Qaeda? It's your white MAGA Republican. And you are the threat to the regime. And because you're a white MAGA Republican, you're by definition a domestic terrorist. And because you're a domestic terrorist, in their eyes, an insurrectionist, you have become a member of a sub-constitutional class. And that's how they've done it.
Has any of this stuff gotten anywhere close to the Supreme Court?
No. There's one case that's happening. It's at the circuit now. Arguments were made on December 12th regarding the 1512 charge. Judge Nichols's couple decisions that he dismissed the case, which was the right decision because the 1512 obstruction charge is inapplicable to January 6th. And that may go if the circuit comes out somehow finds that there was clear error, which they can't, but they probably will. That'll go. Other than that, the problem is that these guys are middle income, white America, middle America people, blue collar, no savings, no previous interaction with the criminal justice system. They don't have the money to take it all the way. And that's why we've had to go out. That's why I have had to get on TV. I go on the podcast. I hold myself out there to raise money for my clients because none of my clients can pay for their own cases. I've had to raise like 90% of everything in order to make this happen.
And you also can't use, I assume, a lot of the payment processing and fundraising platforms because the social media world has decided that they're already guilty.
That's right.
And they're the wrong kind of guilty. They're not the Portland kind of guilty.
Right.
They're the January 6th kind of guilty.
2 guys can walk up to a police station. Both of them can throw Molotov cocktails. If one guy's on the left, it's okay. If the other guy's on the right, he's going to jail.
Has there been any moment in your colloquies, whether it's it's almost all pre-trial at this point, where a judge has let any light shine in, where there's been any acknowledgement that there might be appeal issues here, that there might be problems with how this is being done? Anything that you can see other than those dismissals that are on appeal?
All no with one yes. So generally these judges, who are you, Mr. New York? Why are you here? It's very prim and proper here in DC and things are done a certain way. And, they don't like me and it's what it is because I'm not a DC establishment guy. I can accept that. I'm willing to take hits from my clients. That's what a good lawyer does.
That's right. Absolutely. Being disliked is one of the things we are paid for.
That's it. We're sword and we're shield, and that's our job. But just recently, yesterday, actually, I appeared in front of Judge Hogan, Thomas Hogan, 85 years old, most senior judge on the court. And he said to us that looks like I'm going to be retiring January 31st. Judge, we just scheduled a trial with you. He goes, I hate to do it, but I'm retiring, and didn't really give a whole lot more. And then he looked at us, and we said our pleasantries. The guy was, distinguished career, and he goes, there's 1,000 more of these cases coming. And I'm 85 years old. I don't want to spend the next 4 or 5 years doing this. And basically said, I'm out. I'm paraphrasing here. And that information, I don't know if it was public or not. I think it was suspected. But for me, that was the judge saying, look, I've been on the bench. I'm the most senior judge on the bench. I practice in DC court. I've been a district court judge here since 1982. Chief judge at one time, chief judge of the FISA court at another time. I'm distinguished. I'm honored. And I love my job. I've been here doing this all this time, and we have some of the most beautiful and world-changing cases, especially with regard to policy and the Constitution, come through this court. And I've been doing these January 6th cases for the past 2 years. Now I got to do it for 4 or 5 more. No, my time can be better spent. I'm leaving. And for me, he didn't say anything other than that. But for me, and I don't want to give the appearance of impropriety, but it felt like he was just saying that, look, I'm 85. The next couple of years of my life, I'm not going to spend it on something that doesn't have any worth. And so I'm leaving. And we were all like, wow, like afterwards, like, no one knows why he's really walking away, but he's walking away. And he did say there's another 1,000 of these coming. And that's not a good sign. And maybe he just doesn't want to be a part of it. I don't know.
On that extremely depressing note, believe it or not, Joe, we've been talking for 3/4 of an hour.
Wow, that's great.
It's been fascinating listening to you. You've unfortunately confirmed everything that I've heard and read. And as I said, I talked to some of the guys, and I include Marina as one of the guys, notwithstanding her very unguy-like appearance. It is an absolute travesty, and I don't know where to go with it. I mean, short, and what's also been depressing, of course, I don't have to tell you, is the absolute lack of comment. Maybe it's not absolute, but for all practical purposes, the way Republicans in office, Republican political leaders have just stood and watched this all happen. They're part of that culture. They don't dare depart from the orthodoxy of insurrection.
It's unfortunate. What I can say is this: religious denominations aside, I do believe that America is being punished for being lost. The pandemic is a biblical plague, and there's no two ways about it. Wherever it came from, it's a plague nonetheless. There's wars, rumors of more wars. The economy is bad. You have these people in power. People need to wake up. People need to understand that America is a special place because a very special person, the creator of the entire universe, deemed it as such. And we have forgotten that these beautiful Judeo-Christian roots that we have in this country, we've unilaterally betrayed them as the people. And there has to be a way back. And when you look back over the history, and if you look back, especially into the Old Testament in Israel, there are many times when God has just said, I've had enough with you. You're going to get spanked. And sometimes that spanking lasts hundreds of years, right? And we're trying to avoid that now. I recently had a couple of weeks ago, I appealed to the public for 3 days of fasting and praying, which just ended last night. And we did 3 days of fasting and praying. And I wrote to Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who's one of the most conservative and beautiful leaders of the Catholic Church. And I asked him for his blessing and for his participation, and he wrote back to me, and he sanctioned it. And it was a beautiful and very, very heartfelt, almost to us, message and seal of approval from the kingdom above that God is with us in this. And then members of the Jewish community reached out to us. Rabbi Yehuda Levin and his people wrote this beautiful letter in solidarity with us, asking for Jews to fast on the 10th of Tevis, which was January 3rd, commemorating the fall, the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem. And you had this beautiful coming together of peoples of faith where we all were fasting and praying at the same time, looking up to our God and saying, God, we are desperately in need of your help. And we are very, very, very sorry for our sins and for the sins of our nation. And if our leaders don't have the courage, if our leaders don't have the wherewithal, the faith to do it, please accept our prayers on behalf of ourselves, our families, and of course, our leaders as well. We understand that we're just these minuscule little people here, but for whatever it's worth, we know that this is a part of the deal, and we're very, very sorry. We're fighting against evil. You're the author of all that is good. Please help us win. And look, David needed 5 stones and a slingshot. Gideon needed 300 people in some faith. And I know that God is ultimately in this fight, that God loves the United States of America, that God will not abandon us. He will not abandon this country, and that this will eventually end. And I'm going to be counted among the people who stood on the right side of this, no matter what happens. So help me God.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Good luck Monday.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. And
All right,
good
bye.
job is to you.
Thanks a lot. Stay in touch.
You too.